Steve. Well, good to see everybody today. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our Wednesday 8 a.m. program. And we'll be talking with these wonderful ladies. These are women priests in the Episcopal tradition. And also I'll be filling in for Dr. Jane Vaya, who cannot be with us today because she came down with COVID. But luckily, I wrote a book some years ago and I interviewed her. So I will be filling in parts for her as we go through some of the questions that maybe all of you have wondered about. How did women become priests? So we're going to go through a lot of wonderful stories and sharing. And we just, I'm so glad that you're all on this call today. So some of the ideas that we'll be talking about is, first of all, the history of how did women priests come to be? How did it all begin? And so I know that Reverend Jesse and Reverend Julie will be sharing theirs, and Julie will share a little bit of the Catholic tradition. And I will also share from the book, The Women Catholic Priests, how that happened, how that came about. I'm also going to ask questions about following the heart. Like, how were they called into this position and what called them? And also, once they followed their calling, they really broke the mold, because there were not a lot of women priests in the United States for a very, very long time. So they broke the mold. And how did they do that? And also paving the way. Now that they broke the mold, how are they paving the way for other women to follow their heart and become women priests and become a clergy member and be a leader in their tradition? So it's going to be a wonderful conversation today. So first of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Reverend Dr. Abigail Albert, and I am a co-minister with my husband, Steve Albert, of the All Faith Center here in Poway, California. I'm also the executive director of the Poway Interfaith Team, which we lovingly call Point. And so I will be your host and I will be your moderator today. And like I said, I'll also be filling in for Dr. Jane Vaya. So what I'd like to do is to open with a little prayer, and I'm going to say a few words, but then I'm going to let it be silent so everyone can fill in their own prayer for today and this wonderful meeting and their life, their love, their health, their joy, all whatever you wish to pray for today. So we need a little moment of silence. And in the silence, let's also pray for Dr. Jane so that she is healthy and well again. So let's just take a moment. Thank you, beloved God, for your divine love and energy today as we have this wonderful sharing. Lovely ladies, and even the people in our conversation that are attending. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. So it is. So I think before we actually begin with our ladies, let's have just a very quick run through. We have 4 people that are on our call today. We have Reverend Steve, we have Carol King, Carol Morales, and Isabel Gunning. If you each, and I'm going to start with Steve, could just tell us, well, your name is on the screen, but tell us your faith. And if there's an organization that you're representing, that would be lovely. So we have a chance to know you a little bit. So Steve, you want to start?
Sure. My name is Steve Albert. I'm the director of the World Interfaith Network. Every year we put on Interfaith Awareness Week. This is the 7th year. And my job, as I see it, is to bring people together of different faiths to realize how similar and how wonderful they are individually and as a group. I'm a New Thought minister who has chosen with my wife Abigail to focus on interfaith rather than just our New Thought background.
Thank you, Steve. Carol King, could you just say name and faith and maybe what organization you are representing? Everyone will have to unmute to talk. There's, all right, Carol Morales, would you unmute yourself and maybe you could just share you and your faith and.
Okay, I'm Carol Morales and I am Catholic and I am a member of Point and I am also a member of Pax Christi.
Isabel Gunning, can you share name, faith, and organization?
Yeah, my name is Isabel Gunning. I am a New Thought practitioner with the Agape International Spiritual Center here in Los Angeles. And I'm also part of a focus ministry from the Center for Spiritual Living called the Magnificence Collective. And we're working on with spiritual communities, primarily New Thought, but all of them around diversity and inclusion in spiritual organizations.
Wonderful. Thank you, Isabel. And Carol King, are you with us? Okay, well, we'll just bless her and know she'll show up at some point. So, okay, I'm going to share some bios with you today. I want to just share my screen so that you can all see the bios of these lovely ladies. Can you see this? Can everybody see this? Oh, you can. Okay, good. Okay, so our first lady that will, is the Reverend Julie Fisher. Julie Fisher was born in Buffalo to a Roman Catholic father and a Baptist mother. She became an Episcopalian at the age of 11. She attended the University of Virginia with 2 terms at Cambridge University in England. After college, she worked in human resources and arts administration in a variety of settings. Julie was ordained a priest in 2005 and has served churches in 2 different university towns. Her husband is also a priest. Her hobbies are aerobic dance and making art vestments. And our second lady is the Reverend Jessie Thompson. She is a Pacific Northwest native who is recently located to the desert, discovering how landscape impacts our sense of identity and spirituality. She is a spiritual director, spiritual companion, and an Episcopal priest in Palm Springs, California. Jessie earned a Master of Divinity and a Postmaster's in Transforming Spirituality with an emphasis in spiritual direction at Seattle University School of Theology and Ministry, and did her Anglican Studies certificate at Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley, California. She's a graduate of the Shalom, is that how you pronounce it? Shalom Institute's Contemplative Leadership Program. With over 25 years of ministry experience, faith formation, facilitation, and student adult leadership training, her passions in areas of teaching, spiritual listening, creating space for people to encounter the holy body theology, labyrinth work, MBTI, Enneagram, boy, that's a lot of stuff here, contemplative practices, LGBTQIA+, spirituality, discovering God's deepest desires in our lives. Reverend Jessie's heart beats for the marginalized, and she seeks to provide safe spaces for all to feel welcomed, known, loved, and celebrated. And although Dr. Jane is not with us, she was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1947, has a BA in Spanish language and literature from Purdue, a PhD in theology, religious studies from Marquette University, and a JD University of San Diego. She was a full-time professor of religious studies from 1974 through 1983 and taught part-time afterwards. She worked as a government attorney for almost 28 years. Jane was ordained a deacon in the Roman Catholic Rite in 2004 on the Danube River, a priest in the Roman Catholic Rite in 2006 on the Boded Sea off Swiss shores, and a bishop in 2017. Jane and friend Rod Stevens founded the RCWP Parish, Mary Magdalene, the Apostle Catholic Community, in 2005. It continues to meet weekly in San Diego, California. Jane and the RCWP Nancy Corin developed a comprehensive Catholic lectionary. It follows but modifies the Roman Catholic lectionary to include many passages about and references to women in the Bible. The lectionary is available on the Women's Ordination Conference website. So that's pretty amazing. We have some powerful women leaders in our midst, and we're so happy to have you all here today. So I would like to begin our conversation today, just talking a little bit about the history. So we're going to have both Jesse and Julie, if you want to share. Maybe Julie would like to start, share a little bit about the history of the women ordination in the Episcopal tradition. Or Jesse, you can start. I'm going to let you guys figure out who's going to go first. And then I'm going to say a little bit about how Jane kind of said a little bit about it in her bio, but we'll let you start with the history of the Episcopalian tradition with women. Julie, you want to begin?
Okay, thanks everyone. Not sure what everyone's background is. Don't know if everyone's familiar with the general Catholic tradition. So I'm going to back up a little bit and say about the history of women's ordination in the entire Christian church. And then I can put the Episcopal, and then Abigail can put the Roman Catholic women priest movements in perspective. The early church ordained women as bishops, deacons, and priests. There is incontrovertible evidence of that. However, over the centuries, it's been marginalized, erased, and suppressed, and even falsified. So that is now being recovered for many decades by scholars. And we know that there's evidence in Scripture of women as apostles, deacons, prophets, and congregation leaders. Recent translations of the Bible have recovered that there was a woman apostle named in Paul's letters. Her name was Junia, but over the years, false translations changed her name to a male name. So her female name has been recovered. So Junia was a woman apostle named in Scripture. Apostles are the foundation of authority for all ordination in the Catholic and Western and Eastern Christian tradition. So that's a very important precedent to recover. There is also evidence in early church fresco and tomb inscriptions and mosaics on walls of women serving as priests. Over the years, those pictures would just be declared, oh, those are men. But scholars now looking more closely at them are saying, no, the hairstyles, the dress, the postures, all within the context of Western art, we can tell those were women. There's always also evidence in the early church writings where male theologians and church officials would be in their writings mentioning that women were celebrating the Eucharist and leading congregations and being priests. There were also negative voices denouncing the fact that women were doing this. So that's how we know they were doing it. And in the more outlying areas of the church that weren't part of the centralizing authority of the church, in outlying areas like the Celtic areas of the Roman Empire, way out in Britain and Ireland. The Celtic church out there, being so far removed, was able to do more independent living and ordained women for hundreds and hundreds of years after it had been suppressed closer to the source of authority in Rome. So as male leaders consolidated their hold over the church, they then promoted a theology of male supremacy and gradually suppressed and erased the fact that women had been in leadership roles in the early church. So with that context, how did women get to be ordained after all these years? Well, let me pull up some notes I have here, and I will explain how it happened in the Church of England. Now, the Church of England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation, which was around the mid-1500s. Now, when the Reformation happened, the Church of England being located far geographically away from Europe, separated by the English Channel, the same effect happened to the Church of England that had happened to the earlier Celtic Church. The geographical isolation meant that change came more slowly, and there was time to ponder and think about it and handle the change more strategically. So the Church of England did break away from the Roman Catholic Church's authority. However, it only reformed lightly and retained its Catholic character with some Protestant updates and reforms. I like to think that those of you who are Roman Catholic know that in the 1960s, the Roman Catholic Church did a major reformation from within called Vatican II. And I like to say that we did Vatican II 400 years earlier. So we just got on with it because no longer under the centralized authority of the Pope, there was more freedom to start looking at different theological ideas. So that's an essential character of all Anglican churches, that is, churches who are in the tradition of the Church of England. We have a nickname for ourselves called the Via Media, which means the middle way. So we have always prided ourselves on retaining our Catholic character, but also being open to Protestant and newer ideas. So the Episcopal Church in the United States was always part of the Church of England until we broke away from the authority of England when we had the revolution. So in 1789, we were cast off the rest of the Church of England and managed to figure out how we could get our own bishops and form a separate denomination that was still part of the Church of England spiritually, but not under their authority. And that model became the model for the Worldwide Anglican Communion, which to this day is an association of Anglican flavored churches in provinces around the world, in virtually every country in the world. And it's the second largest denomination of Christians in the world after the Roman Catholic Church. You don't hear much about it because in the United States, we're actually a very small denomination. We're only about maybe under 5% of American Christians because of we had so many problems in the early United States getting established as a denomination because we were thought of as maybe a Trojan horse for England to get back, and with the War of 1812 and everything, the Episcopal Church has always grown more slowly and needed to establish it. It's a safe church for this country. Nevertheless, we've had a great many influential members of the Episcopal Church in the United States, many presidents and leaders, and the people who wrote the Constitution for the United States were mostly Episcopalians. And therefore, when the Episcopal Church was put together, the Constitution that was written for us was also very grassroots empowered, not strong centralized authority. So again, we were able to move forward with changes that all churches were facing in the 20th century about how to bring women into more equality. And so after decades of theological discussion and hard work, the Episcopal Church was able to bring the question of women's ordination to our decision-making body, which turned it down repeatedly. So in 1974, a group of women and their supporting bishops did illegal ordinations of them to the priesthood. They were called the Philadelphia 11, and next year we'll be celebrating their 50th anniversary. Some of them are still alive. Thanks. And the church, within 2 years after that, said, okay, time to make them legal and change our policy. So women have been ordained since 1976 in the Episcopal Church. And we'll talk more about the challenges over the year of actually living out that call and vocation within our world. But that point is where I'd like to pass it over to Abigail, because that's the point at which the Roman Catholic woman priest movement began, inspired by the success of the Episcopal Church, which is that close to the Roman Catholic Church. So it was very inspiring to them. So Abigail?
Thank you. That was amazing. Wonderful history. So I have the book here, so I apologize for reading, but this is how I can help Jane be part of our group today. So I'm going to just say that what she said, if it were not for the accident of her gender, and the fact that she is married with 2 sons, Dr. Jane would be an ideal candidate for the priesthood. Dr. Jane converted to Catholicism as a freshman in college and has a PhD in religious studies and a law degree. She said, I have long believed in the legal principle of civil disobedience. So the canon law that bans women from the priesthood is unjust. We have to break it in order to change it. So since 2002, approximately 100 Catholic women have been ordained as priests in defiance of Vatican law. While a small number of renegade female priests may seem like more of an irritant to the Vatican than a threat, their numbers are growing. More than, and of course, wrote this book in 2013, so there's more women now, but at that time, more than 120 women, many with long ties to the church, as nuns, college professors, chaplains, and lay leaders, are currently in training for ordination. And on June 29th, 2002, frustrated with the lack of progress, 6 European and 1 American woman were ordained as priests by Romolo Braschi, a controversial former priest who claimed to have been ordained a bishop. In the women's view, Braschi's presence secured their standing in apostolic succession, which links them to the original apostles. They placed a notarized copy of Braschi's ordination in a safe deposit box in the European Bank. To the Vatican, the attempt to document, they thought it was irrelevant. Within 8 months, all 7 ladies were excommunicated and a document signed by the then Pope Benedict. Since the first ordination, however, no other female priests have been formally excommunicated. And actually that's not true because they have been. So at that point, so that kind of started in 2002. The first women were ordained priests. They were excommunicated, but they're still going strong. Let's see. I think that's pretty much. Oh, and then it says, in May 2010, the Vatican issued a pronouncement in the Vatican newspaper stating that any woman who attempts ordination or anyone who assists a woman in attempting ordination is by their own actions excommunicated. So that's where we are now. And we know, and Dr. Jane has been excommunicated, but she's still going strong, and her parish is still going strong as well. So that kind of takes care of the history a little bit. So I'd like to move on to the idea of following the heart in spite of everything, and your calling, and how it just became so meaningful to you to become a priest. And so I'm going to ask Jessie to begin to share with how did they call to your heart? Why are you a woman priest?
Thank you, Dr. Abigail. And thank you, Reverend Julie. This is, I think I'm such a nerd for history because it informs who we are, and you could hear the same story a million times and pull out some pieces. And I think in our conversations to prepare for today, I think I'm just really struck by the women whose shoulders, I don't always like to say stand on, that sounds a little violent, but for whom I can recognize would be in absolute awe of this moment on a random technological connection to see us in collars. And so I actually didn't grow up in the Episcopal tradition, and oftentimes I will find Episcopalians who have been so since birth, and I call them unicorns, because this tradition really does end up attracting a lot of people from the Roman Catholic, from the evangelical, from no faith tradition, from everything in between. Because as Reverend Julie said, that the via media, the middle way, we talk about the tent. It's a big tent with flexible walls and many doors to enter into it. And so the spaciousness of this tradition, I think, provides a variety of entry points to find rest and empowerment and faith in new ways. And so I grew up in a more evangelical background. And I think that's the benefit of having two priests on here from two ends of the spectrum, Roman Catholic to evangelical. And I grew up in a particular tradition that was Wesleyan holiness. So if I were to pull up the Christian family tree, as we would say, you've got sort of the root as like, one holy lowercase c, Jesus was Jewish, and then you've got the whole, and then it's sort of the tree goes into the Catholic and the Protestant. And I always say the Episcopalians are in the middle holding hands, trying to just keep that tree together in some sense. And then from the Episcopalians are Methodist and Wesleyan holiness. So you kind of have these different branches, which is to me a very gracious way to look at it in terms of what Christian voices are loudest in our particular political and social environment. Find out where they live on the tree. That'll give you some context. So in my tradition growing up, there were women ministers, and that was just a given. So I felt a call really early when I was, preteen, to do ministry. And I was affirmed in that tradition. The tradition itself is a pretty conservative tradition outside of that. So in terms of the inclusivity beyond women, there are lots of other folks who would not have been ordained and or welcomed in those particular ways. And so I actually was a minister in that tradition very young, in my early 20s, and then eventually through a very longer than a Zoom call conversation, found my way heading to Seattle University, their School of Theology and Ministry, seeking degrees in spiritual direction. I had a mentor who said, this is what it feels like your calling is. You love sitting with people and creating space for the holy. And so through that, the School of Theology is good Jesuit, Catholic. I love the Jesuits. I learned a lot about Ignatian spirituality and imagination and creativity and play. But the school itself is ecumenical. So at any given class, you'd have a Catholic, a Methodist, a Unitarian, and I knew I was being called out of that tradition, but I wasn't sure where I was called in. So I would just go with every classmate of mine to every church, every meeting, everything I could find to say, where is my theology? And in the midst of all of that, for years, I had occasionally been secretly flirting with the Episcopal Church. And in part because I had not grown up in a tradition where there was like gold crosses being processed and icons and beauty and glass and just all of the art. And certainly not a tradition that would claim that what we were doing meant that this was the thing, right? The real presence at the table. And so I flirted with that a lot. So I went with all of the different classmates and eventually kept sneaking over to this Episcopal church. And so I finally said, well, we're friends with benefits. We make out on Sunday mornings, but we're not in a committed relationship. And I ended up doing an internship at an Episcopal church in Seattle that was predominantly Japanese American. It was a small congregation in the international district that during the war had been closed down. They had all been sent to camps, and after the war, they'd come back, and now it was their descendants. And so in many ways, I was such a guest in a minority in this Episcopal environment that really valued reverence. And so I would be, as a newbie, I'd be like, are we bowing or is this a Japanese bow? What are we doing? This is so incredible. And the flower arrangements, but what it taught me was when we gather in space, what we do matters. And it wasn't just a symbol or it was the thing. And then if we call and we gather, then when we head out into the world as transfigured, as transformed people, we become the belovedness that we experienced in that place. And I fell in love with sacraments and all kinds of things that I didn't even always have language for because I'd not grown up in that tradition. And so through, again, a longer story, I eventually was confirmed as an Episcopalian, and 2 weeks later graduated with a Master of Divinity. So everyone said, you kind of did that bizarrely, like what's going on? And I started a process of discernment, and can share a little bit more later when we talk about challenges. But through that process, the rector of the church, which is the head of the parish, each parish has a rector or priest in charge, and he had also converted from a more fundamentalist background. And so sort of the lovely human, but kept throwing more and more hurdles for me to jump through to consider ordination and read this one more book, or we'll get this going or we'll, and eventually felt like, well, maybe I'm being called to be a really good lay person who's an Episcopalian, and ended up leaving and working at a college, teaching and running the Learning Communities program at an institution, until a few years into that, I sort of felt the little tap, tap, tap. Actually, maybe that priest thing is sort of the thing. And at the time, I actually had, the church I was attending had a woman rector, and she right away said, absolutely, of course I see that. Let's get you a discernment group right away. And just like, boom. And I think from that piece too, I learned again, which we'll talk later, but how women have such a gift and a power to create more space for other women, and which was new. There wasn't a competitiveness, there was a joy in celebrating. So then went through that whole process, and and eventually became a priest. But I think for me, it was a sense of I remember being young, and I said something about, to my parents, well, if you love God, then this is how you love people, right? And you do this kind of thing. And my parents said, no, that's what a minister does. Not everyone who loves God does this kind of thing. And I sort of held that near to pay attention to where the grace is moving for me, and to live into what would it look like for me to live into a call as a priest that doesn't have to be exactly like the call of every male priest I'd been around, or even female priest. And so that's, again, this is like, short stories of how you get there, but that's sort of how I ended up in this tradition, and in particular wearing a collar with my family, who still was like, well, this seems very Catholic. Do you still love Jesus? And I was like, sure. Yeah, actually enough to, take out some debt and go to school. And so it's really been a great experience to then be around other priests, and I'll turn it to Reverend Julie, who come from a sacramental tradition, to find ourselves in dialogue, and it sort of expands the beauty of what it means to live in this really wide tent with these flexible walls. So I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Jessie. It's interesting that your story has so many parallels with mine, although we represent maybe the Protestant and the Catholic wings of the church. I actually, I had a Roman Catholic father and a Baptist mother, but my Baptist mother had to sign the paper when they were married that she would bring the children up Catholic, but she reneged as soon as her first child was born. She just couldn't do it. So we were nothing for years at all. So I didn't get any religious training at all for years. Then my mother felt, well, you should probably be going to church. So we were Presbyterian. Can't get more Protestant than that. And we did that for maybe a year or two, enough for me to be given a Bible and go through one vacation Bible school. That was my formation when we dropped out again, because my father just couldn't take the Protestantness of it. So my mother still wouldn't go to the Catholic Church. So again, we were nothing for years. And then finally my mother said, I think we should probably go to a church. So she said, what about the Episcopal Church? Because it's right in the middle. So we all went to the Episcopal Church when I turned 11. And I was shot right between the eyes by the same thing Jessie loved. The beautiful aesthetics of liturgical worship. The space that I was in was a church built in the 1880s with Tiffany glass windows and beautiful art that had been brought from Europe. And so it was just gorgeous. There were particularly spectacular vestments that were all extremely historical art vestments, just gorgeous. And so I was surrounded by all kinds of symbols all around me visually that I needed to interpret and learn about. And that really informed my faith. That plus the fact that I had read the Narnia books by C.S. Lewis, and they had made me a Christian. Even though for years we weren't going to church or anything, I was working my way through C.S. Lewis, and I was all primed for when we went to the Episcopal Church. So I just fell in love, age 11. And at the age of 12, I was there on Easter Sunday, and I was standing in front of the altar looking at the beautiful floral display, and I had my little camera with me, and anybody older will remember you only had 12 shots. You had to carefully pick what you were going to take a picture of. So I was there trying to figure out how to line up a shot and would it come out. And I heard a voice from God as clear as a bell, utterly, unmistakably God. I've only had that experience very few times in my life, and that was the first time ever. So when you have that experience, you don't say, am I getting an interesting idea in my mind? Or I'm having an inspiration. You instantly know it's God, instantly, and you don't have any questions. So I said, well, God said to me, I want you to be a priest. And I said, how can this be since I'm a girl? Women in the Episcopal Church then, when I was a child in the late 60s and early 70s, in my church, women could not be acolytes. I wanted to be an acolyte really badly, and they wouldn't let me. Women could not read the scripture from the front of the church. Women could not bear the chalice and help serve and worship. Women could not be on the lay leadership council of the church called the vestry. And women could not even be ushers and hand out programs before the service started. Women couldn't do anything but take care of the altar and do the dishes, and then be in the women's group, So I said to God, how can this be since I'm a girl? And he said very clearly, I'm working on that. In the meantime, I need you to get ready. I said, okay, because what were you going to say? It's God. So I said, okay. So I spent years getting ready. I did ask, how do you get ordained in the Episcopal Church to the priest, who was a rabidly anti-women's ordination priest who would preach on it. And I had to sit there and listen to that. I did not tell my secret to anybody because it would be vilified. So I asked him, and he said, oh, you have to go to college, then you have to go to seminary, and then you have to have a job for a long time because they don't ordain anybody until they're well over 30. So you have to be having a career first. That was the style back then. They only wanted clergy who'd had a long career first, and wanted second career people who were older and seasoned and all of that. It's different now. They're eagerly seeking out young people so that they can form them, and you can get years of experience in ministry, But back then it was not till you're way over 30, so get a career first. So I did a bunch of things. I graduated with a liberal arts degree in the middle of the Reagan recession and couldn't get a professional job. So I went to work in a hospital in an intensive care unit as a coordinator of logistics and phone and medical records and everything. And that was terrific for helping prepare me to be a priest. I got promoted into the training department, so I was in human resources. That was also very helpful. Later, I was in arts administration in a nonprofit artist in residence program. That also was helpful. Everything I did, I was just gleaning everything I could from it to prepare for the priesthood. I finally got to go to seminary, and I finally got ordained in 2005. And I have served in 2 churches since then, and I have about 18 years now at 2 different churches. So Jesse, who is much younger than I am, and the next generation of priests, has had a much longer ministry than I was able to have because it took years and years to get ordained. Not just because they wanted people over 30, but because there were a lot of barriers to ordination for women, even when it became legalized in the Episcopal Church. There were massive barriers for the next 2 generations afterwards. So we'll talk about barriers a little bit more in a few minutes, but that's my story of how I became a priest.
Wow, thank you. Thank you both. Just incredible stories. And I'm just honored that you're here with us and to be able to share this all with all of us on the call today. Dr. Jane, her thoughts on how she was called. She said, I think my call was more broad. It was to do something as a woman for women and to change the attitude of this powerful, international, worldwide Roman Catholic institution towards women and children. For me, becoming a woman priest was part of accomplishing that goal. When I heard about the Roman Catholic Women Priests, that's RCWP, I thought, I can do that. Had a big exclamation point in the book. I was obviously up against a huge institutional barrier. Becoming an ordained woman in the Roman Catholic tradition wasn't possible at that time. So I went to Marquette University and got a doctorate in religious studies. I was one of the first generations of women to be allowed to study theology at a Catholic university. I obtained my doctorate and began to teach, first in a Catholic college and then in the Catholic university. As a woman and now a theologian, I saw the classroom as an opportunity to share a different perspective on women in the Roman Catholic tradition. My expertise was New Testament studies, so I learned an enormous amount as I prepared to teach and as I taught. The key thing I learned was the New Testament gospel tradition presents a radical inclusivity on the part of Jesus in his lifetime that extended to women. With a doctorate in religious studies, I felt I was qualified and able to do this job. That is why I applied to the team of women Roman Catholic priests in December 2003. The first RCWP ordination was June 2002, and I was ordained in June 2004. And like you, Julie and Jesse, she had a calling very early. She said, a year or two after I was ordained, an old friend of mine came to visit. He was a practicing Catholic in a parish. Before he came, I thought I should tell him what I had done, just in case he did not want to see me at all. When I told him, said, Larry, I've been ordained a Roman Catholic priest. And he said, you told me back in 1968 that you would be one of the first women ordained as a Catholic priest. And now you've gone and done it. So back in 68, Jane told somebody, I'm going to be a Catholic priest. So he gave me back that wonderful memory of when I was a teenager in my early years, participating in a large, very progressive Catholic campus ministry, that I declared I wanted to be a Roman Catholic priest. So that's a little bit of Dr. Jane's story. So these stories are amazing. And I think if we all go back into our own thoughts of where we were and how we were called to do our work today, it's pretty amazing how God just shows up in your life, gives you the call, and thank goodness we answer the call, right? So after the call, obviously the women broke the mold by being called. And so in order for you all to break the mold, what were some of the challenges and obstacles that you faced? Not just for you, but you can even share obstacles that other women in your tradition are facing even today, becoming a woman priest. How did you meet them? How did you work through them? How did you empower yourself? And how do you empower future generations to remove these obstacles and do what their hearts are telling them to do? So we're going to ask either Jesse or Julie to start with the challenges and obstacles. Oh, Julie and Jesse, you're both muted.
There we go. I think Jessie is pointing to me because I'm older and I went through it in the previous generation to her. So I can tell the story of how hard it was for the beginning women. Oh my gosh. When women were first permitted to be ordained as priests in the Episcopal Church in 1976, it was because our body that makes decisions had voted on that, but implementing it meant getting everybody else to go along with it. There were still a large number of clergy, of course, all male, who opposed the ordination of women. There were people who said, well, okay, we'll let women be ordained, but we can't make any of them bishops because if a woman priest is ordained, she's illegitimate, but at least the only damage she'll do is the parish she's in. But if you make her a bishop, then anybody she ordains is invalid, male or female. So for women to get to be bishops and be in decision-making empowered roles in the hierarchy took another 2 generations. Women were still lagging far behind with being ordained as bishops right up until the early 2010s, when there was a Facebook page formed called Breaking the Episcopal Glass Ceiling for women who wanted to promote women in the kinds of large churches and the kinds of roles that make you then seen as a good candidate for bishop, and then to try to get more women candidates for bishop. So that was a big push that was put on by the women to start empowering each other and encouraging each other to apply for the big jobs. See, up until then, it was very hard for women to get the big jobs in the church. In the first round of women who became ordained, many of them could not get parishes to hire them, because hiring takes place at the parish level. They have to agree. So they couldn't often get parishes to take them. They'd have to take assistant positions. Often they were in the female track of just being limited to working with children's and women's ministries and Christian education and other non-threatening kind of cul-de-sacs of leadership. But for a woman to become the head of a congregation was very difficult for women to achieve. And mostly women were allowed to take churches that the men didn't want, the part-time churches, the rural churches, the small churches. Dioceses would often take 2 tiny churches and cluster them together and then put a woman in charge of them. And the parish would, be forced to take a woman because they couldn't get anything else. When I was ordained in a wonderfully loving and supportive diocese, nevertheless, they tried to put me out west at a church. And when I asked about the church, they said, well, they're totally opposed to the ordination of women, but they would have no choice, so they'd have to hold their nose and take you. So, and then they get used to you. I'm sure they will get used to you, but, going into a situation where people didn't want you was incredibly difficult for the first couple generations of women priests, where strong bishops might get them in, but then they have faced a lot more obstacles with lots of conscious and unconscious bias against women. So, there were very few women then who were getting the big churches, the full-time jobs, the places that had financially sustainable ministries. And if a woman was wanting to get those bigger roles, she was often treated like she was pushy, aggressive, inappropriately ambitious. All the kinds of things that men would be seen as exhibiting, they would be strong leaders. Whereas if women did it, they were difficult, bitchy. So that held women back for quite some time. We know that bias against women has been surging again in our culture, and it's not entirely gone from the church. It's far improved, far improved. The Breaking the Episcopal Glass Ceiling cohort of women has made huge breakthroughs in getting women into the bigger positions and into the more decision-making roles. And I am so proud to say that here where I am in the Diocese of Southern Ohio, the northern half of the state of Ohio is the Diocese of Ohio. They just had a bishop election where all the candidates, except for one, were female. And in my diocese here, we now have a bishop election coming up in a month, and all those candidates at this point are female. So the decision-making bodies are being more intentional about not having just a token woman, but having really looking seriously at the candidates and saying it's time to hold up more women and make the whole hierarchy more representative. So it's much improved. I will say, I have met both opposition and support over the years in my quest to be ordained. It took me much longer to get ordained than it does nowadays because of this. I was going to be part of a clergy couple, and they told me that my husband had to go through the process first because they would never ordain him if they knew that I wanted to be a priest, so I needed to hide it during his entire ordination process, and just be like the good little minister's wife type person. And that once the kip had gotten safely through the door, then I could start to put the feelers out to apply. Now the ordination process takes 7 years usually. So that meant I was being told, go to the back of the bus for another 7 years. So, you know, delay after delay after delay. However, there were, you know, moments of grace and support. I remember when I finally had gotten ordained in the Diocese of Nebraska, thank you, Nebraska, I was contacted because there was a small rural church in Nebraska that didn't have a priest and they needed to do a funeral. And they said, oh, could Julie be sent down to do it? Because I was working as an unpaid associate, you know, typical, at a church in Omaha. Could Julie go down and do it? And I said, has a woman ever done any services at that church? And they said no. And I said, you need to go ask the vestry to give permission, the Council of Church Leaders, because I don't want to just walk in and surprise anybody, you know? And the family who's having this funeral needs to say yes. So they called the council together and debated it. And somebody said, you know, the lady who's being buried, she opposed the ordination of women her whole life. And everyone sat there in silence like, oh no, we can't have a woman priest do her service. But then somebody spoke up and said, well, you know, she's in heaven now, so she surely supports it now. And the rest of the vestry said, yeah. So I went down and did the service. And it was just so adorable. The family of the lady kept looking at me like, oh, you are so cute. I love what you're doing. You're a girl. It was really joyful and affirming, you know. So there have been many moments where people had their breakthrough experience of experiencing a woman in ministry and seeing that, you know, and norming it. You have to give yourself the chance to have the experience, and then it seems normal to you. But so many people will not give themselves the chance to have the experience. You know?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Julie. That powerful stories. Powerful stories. So Jessie, how about you? What challenges have you been facing?
I love those stories. I think what's interesting we've talked about is one of the selling points I always tell people about the Episcopal Church is that they'll call you young into your like 50s and 60s. They're always like, oh yeah, you young kids. So I'm in my mid 40s, but I tell everyone, grow your bangs out and throw on lipstick, and no one knows how old you really are. And the irony is I am co-rectors with my spouse, actually, at a parish in Palm Springs where 80 to 85% of our parishioners are gay men. So they keep telling me, well, we're game with the lipstick, but we have no hair to grow out our bangs, is what they'll tell me all the time. So I think in some sense, while we are some generational differences, I think the water you swim in as a woman, there's more connections And so I think about my formative years in ministry prior to becoming an Episcopalian and prior to becoming a priest. We're in a denomination that welcomed women. But when I look back and think through sort of how those formed me, there was quite a few barriers, even disguised as, we welcome women. And I remember in particular, this sort of, again, had shaped my early memory or her early identity as a woman minister was, I was probably 16 or 17. And I got invited to go to this thing of that denomination called Wild Women of God. And it was for women who were feeling a call to ministry to support us. And on one hand, it was this great experience. I had not been around like this many women who were like, oh my gosh, is this what this looks like? How does this feel? But I remember one of the sessions, which was sort of this like key session that talked about particularly that they made the comment. So women, I'm trying to think of how they said it. When a woman gets up to speak, everyone will look, and if they decide they like what she looks like, they will listen to what she says. And if a man gets up to speak, they will hear what he says and incidentally might decide to look at him. And that was sort of seared into my very early brain in some pretty negative ways, right? And so when I talk a lot with my colleagues, I think an ongoing challenge, which I think is true for women everywhere, but particularly weird and strange in the church, that though you might see Julie and I both wearing collars, and we've got two different kinds, which are both acceptable. We're quite fashionable in this tradition, but for a variety of reasons. And sometimes I wear that, and sometimes, we're wearing these sort of similar things. There's not a week or a moment that goes by that my appearance is not commented on, which has nothing to do with my ability to sit with someone in a hospital while they're dying, has nothing to do with my ability to preach or speak or offer pastoral care. And so, so there's, I think that ongoing sort of ways about thinking through that. And I, like a good, like rebel, I wrote, grad school papers on like, screw the appearance and blah, blah, blah. There's some great books and resources about, I can, wear what I want, do what I want. But that sort of notion of, are you presentable to be pastoral, which is kind of super gross, not kind of, it's super gross. Where, you see these men priests who like look like they've never seen a mirror in their lives, and everyone, oh, but Father so-and-so. I think the other thing along with that is the professional titles. In fact, before this, I had asked Dr. Abigail, what would you like to be called? And I think we know this is true in anything, right? It's so my spouse is, people will say, oh, well, Father Dan and Jesse. And I'm like, no. And so when we first started, that's one of the things you'll notice is in the Episcopal Church, most clergy who are priests, you'll see bishop so-and-so, deacon so-and-so, but we don't go by priest so-and-so. Usually it's father so-and-so or mother so-and-so. But when we started, I said, I do not want to be mother superior, so please don't call me mother. But in particular, both of us go by reverend. We don't go by father or mother. And that's our preferred clergy pronouns. And so watching how people will dismiss or disregard that, again, father so-and-so or reverend so-and-so and Jesse. And so, so I think those things, again, which are not specific to women priests or women clergy, but thinking about ways where, and I'm married to someone who's very strategic. In fact, he only refers to me as Reverend Jesse all the time in public. Because, and finally we had parishioners go, do you guys call each other that at home? It's like, no. And he'll say, well, if you notice, you will often refer to your previous rector as Father so-and-so, and you will call me Reverend, but you will only call her Jessie. And she's older, has way more ministry experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And regardless of her resume, that's what she, so I think more about the systemic places of challenging, I think for me, and I think that question about how do we work to empower future generations, I think about how, I've said this to Dr. Abigail and Reverend Julie, but I am a current evangelist for the Barbie movie, and I will talk about it all day and all night. But one piece about it I really walked away from was this women empowering women, which is a counter narrative to what culturally we see. And there's a line in the movie where, the daughter's like, face it, everybody hates women. Women hate women, men hate women. It's the one thing we can all agree on. And I love this line because the way the movie unfolds and the way I think about systemically thinking about future generations is I absolutely love that social media has given us an eye into so many women who are doing such cool ministries as priests. And I am excited that they don't have to face some of the challenges. And I'm excited for the way there's one particular priest who's pretty well known on social media, and she goes by Father. She's like Father so-and-so, just kind of breaking the norm. And I think just in terms of embracing what it means that the parts of our femininity or the parts of us that are gift, which kind of leads into the joys questions you might be pulling up next. But I just think about what would it look like if, rather than having to compete for the few jobs that might be offered to women at some of these big churches that, Julie was talking about, which is true. My first gig was 2 small, fledgling churches, and I had to be priest in charge over both. And it was really hard, and they were not used to a woman, it was very hard. So thinking about the ways that generations of priests now will be able to help women and see them go beyond what we've been able to do and be excited about the future of the church. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And what you said, I remember one of the ladies that I interviewed for my book, who was a Lutheran minister, but she asked that her name not be in the book because she said a lot of personal things. It was for my thesis. So she says, it's fine for your thesis, but not in the book. Okay. She said, what really disheartens her when she gets up on the platform to give a message, and she thinks it's a powerful message, and then after church, somebody comes up and says, I really like the shoes you're wearing. It's like, did you not hear my message? They're more, like you said, they're more concerned about what she was wearing. And somebody pointed out she liked her shoes. It was like, I was kind of bowled away by that. But what you're saying is, it's true. And so we still have a lot of barriers to break, don't we? So I have a few ideas from Jane, Dr. Jane. And she said, I hope that eventually there will be Roman Catholic women bishops, which she is now since 2017, because this was earlier written, who are acknowledged by the canonical church. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. There are Roman Catholic bishops and the Roman Catholic women priest movement. Eventually, I hope the concept of women cardinals will be attained, and the concept of a woman pope embraced. And she said, one of my professors said to his undergraduate students back in the mid-60s, now get this, mid-60s, he said, we will know the Roman Catholic Church has embraced the gospel where there is a Black female pregnant pope. I love that. I love that. He said that in the classroom. Probably may have been let go. I don't know after that, but she put that in the book. I just love that. So she says, I believe I have already broken the mold by becoming a woman priest. Initially, as a practicing and very involved Roman Catholic, I perceived myself as a faithful Roman Catholic. I did everything I knew in order to change the church. I taught theology. I attended the local parish. I was a lector. I found a progressive Catholic community where I was permitted to render the biblical readings in an inclusive language. She says, I did everything I could to change the church, yet I could see the church not changing and not embracing the theological vision of the Second Vatican Council. So she said, rather, the church was steadily, consciously, and deliberately retreating from the theological vision of the Second Vatican Council. She also said, I had reached the point where there was nothing else I could do. I became disenchanted with male clergy. It became clear to me over the years that no matter how supportive they were as individuals about the role of women in the church, they would not put their personal lives on the line for women in order to change the church. And some other things, she says, in order to follow my heart and do what I believed was right in the Catholic Church, I had to make some changes. She said that she was ordained a priest on June 24th, 2006. But she says at the time, her sons were 20 and 17. This broke my heart when she said this. The elder was in college. The younger son was finishing high school at a Catholic school. And I knew there would be severe reprisals for him if I disclosed my ordination. He had asked me not to be ordained until he graduated. So I discussed it with the RCWP leaders in Europe. They suggested I take a pseudonym for purposes of my ordination and not share my ordination with anyone until my son graduated. I asked my son if that would be acceptable, and he agreed. So I told no one until after my younger son had graduated from high school and had already been accepted into college. I wanted his future to be in place as well. So my ordination was that serious. So, she had to hide who she was for her sons because they would be ostracized or, whatever would happen. She just didn't want them to feel anything coming down on them. And she said, one obstacle we face is adapting the setting where we worship to Roman Catholic practice. She said that she says, what we call confession in the Roman Catholic Church, she was not able to do, even though she rented space in a Protestant church, there was no place where they could have confession. So that was a challenge for her. No place for a private one-on-one reconciliation. So when people call me, I set up appointments to see them in my home. I sat with individuals one-on-one and opened with prayer, listening to what it is that they want. So this was all in her home. So that was a challenge. So that was an obstacle that she had to face, letting people know after her sons had graduated and not having a place for confession. So that was concerning for her. So we're going to go on and let's see. Vanessa, I know you have a question. I'm going to ask that you hold all questions until the end so we can continue with our questions. I know we're a little bit late on time only because we started late, and I apologize. So if you wouldn't mind, if we could go an extra 10 minutes so we actually fill in the hour and a half, and that would be great. So if we could maybe have we have maybe 10 more minutes for the following questions. So we're not going to, the ones that we discussed, we're probably just going to shrink them down a little bit. And so we allow maybe the last 10 minutes for questions, because I think people do have a lot of questions for both of you. So maybe we could even combine a little bit the next question before we do our, maybe one last word of advice. You could combine what brought you joy in the priesthood, and also with the joy, how did you balance your work life with your family life? So if you can combine those, and if each of you would take maybe about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe shorten it a little bit, then we can wrap it up and then have questions. So Julie or Jesse, whoever would like to start. Okay, Jesse.
I was thinking a lot about the joys and benefits of being a woman priest, and I think there are so many. And I think one of them that kind of popped into my head as I was reflecting, preparing for today, was sort of the phrase, a good woman goes a long way. And what I mean by that is one of the things that I have experienced as a priest in the Episcopal Church is so many people coming from so many different traditions that have been wounded in traditions, and they are looking for a place to rest. They're still suspicious, perhaps, of clergy, and certainly suspicious of men and collars. And they see me, and first of all, I don't look like the priest that they grew up with. So there's a little bit sort of unarming or unnerving, I don't know. And so there's this opportunity for healing in new ways, and opportunity for reframing the difference between a clergy person and God, which can sometimes be really convoluted or conflated when we're young and growing up. And so a good woman goes a long way is I've also seen folks who come in, and if they came from another tradition, but they had a really excellent woman minister, that has been a story I've heard over and over, that these fierce, incredible women are holding space. And so that when that person then moves to Palm Springs, especially, it's a retirement community, and folks are moving in from all over the world. Actually, if they had a good woman priest somewhere else, they walk in already excited to see me, excited to listen, excited, and having a context about where the Spirit might be leading us. And I'm so aware of that, because that's such a joy for me that there are so many women who are doing really hard work with folks who have had very real traumatic experiences in churches and in faith communities. And that's to me a joy to partner and be a part of it. I think along with that, for those who have never had a woman priest, I love that I get to be the face of the Holy One in a new way. And so it is so different than what they've experienced. I've had people say, I've never received communion from a woman before. This is wild. And they are saying it not accusatory. They're saying it with this sense of like mind open. I never even conceived of this, right? Like this thing that seems so obvious. How did I miss this thing? And I think because of my own personality, I think I make myself pretty accessible. We are all humans figuring this out. I am not at a tier above me. Don't put me on a pedestal. And so because of that accessibility, I think it has cracked open space for people to have really deep conversations really quickly about those things and about, a lot of things. Because again, I think as women, we do bring in a lot of, we bring in so much more than we ever, right, than we could ever imagine. So if they had a good mother, if they had a good sister, if they had a good, all of that stuff comes out that may not have come out if I were a dude in a collar. And I think along with that, the joys and the balance question, which is a great way to combine those actually. I'm just struck right now by the fact that our moderator is also married to a minister, and the other priest in this chat room is married to a minister, and I am married to a minister. So we are kind of weirdos that all found each other, because that's not the case for most. I just have to say, if anyone's going, is this what you have to do? But the two of us work together, which is kind of a unique experience, but we went through a program about clergy couples and discern that and that whole thing. But
Jesse, I'm going to have to ask you to kind of
wrap
it up a little bit so Julie has a chance. Yeah.
I think the balance piece and the joy piece is having someone who is a partner in the same sense, the same calling and career, who we take turns calling each other out on the joys that are happening when ministry can not be that way, and also can call each other out. And by call each other, I don't mean bust each other out, but hold space for the other person to find balance, and the other can take that burden, or that it's this flowing river of partnership.
Thank you. Julie. You have about 4 minutes.
I'll be brief. Like, amen to everything Jesse said. So just tape that right onto mine. I too am a clergy couple. As I mentioned earlier, when we were trying to get ordained, that was greatly looked down on and greatly disfavored. There were dioceses where bishops would not have clergy couples at all. So it really limited our sense of call. And nevertheless, it was one of the things we discussed on our first date, because there's no point in dating any further if either one of us didn't want to be part of that. And I have to say, we're living the dream. He and I have just always wanted to be priests together, and that would be our life. It took so many years for us to get there. And you would think that when you form a goal very early in life, like I did, to be ordained, and then when I met Kip at age 21 to be a clergy couple, and then it took so many years of strife, stress, grossly underpaid jobs. Both of us had to work in order to focus on all the volunteer work we were doing for free for the church for literally several decades, and in order to get ordained, and how we got turned down by dioceses, had to seek other dioceses, and persist and persist and persist. And you would think, okay, what's it like when you really get to do it then? Is it a letdown? Is it different than you thought? So many decades have passed. Well, it's way better even than anything we could have anticipated. I love being a priest. I love being a priest because it is my vocation that God implanted in me since I was a child. I am living out the call God called me to. And nobody can be happy in life unless they're doing the thing that God calls them to. What God calls them to is unique to each individual, and we all need to figure out what that is, and we need to all do our vocations, because that's the only thing that truly fulfills us and enables us to use all of our gifts in the place that we are designed to use them in. And so signs of a fulfilled vocation are joy and fulfillment in it. And I am so pleased and so satisfied in life that this is something I was called early to do and strove for years to do it. And it is now more fulfilling than I ever imagined it could be. So thank you, God. Shout out to God.
Hey. Thank you, ladies. So let me do a quick thing from Jane. She said many joys in her parish when she was a practicing priest. She started the inclusive language for God and for everything in the liturgy, the gender equality. Her joy was empowering women and the men of the parish to take responsibility for the destiny of the community. That was very joyful for her. She also said that when she took over a parish, her husband at the time was Catholic, but not practicing. And he came back into the practice when she took over, and he became a great part of the parish and a leader. And so as the two of them were in there, their sons came back to the church. And so the whole family got re-anchored in the Catholic tradition, which she thought was just wonderful because they had been away from it for so long. And so now they were all back. That was a great joy for her. Just sharing her faith. And the balance was that she was actually a district attorney at the same time she was a full-time Catholic priest. So she said her health took a toll, and that was she was out of balance health-wise. And so she had to realize that she needed to rely more on her co-pastors and be able to say no, because people really didn't want her to say no when they asked her, will you do this? And she had to learn how to say no and really look out for her self-care, because that brought more balance into her life. And then in time, she did retire from the VA so she could spend full time with being the priest. So anyway, that was kind of just a little synopsis of her with joys and balance. what I'd like to do now is it's at 9:30. So if you are still on, everybody, we could spend another maybe 5-10 minutes just going through your questions. So please keep your questions short. I'm going to look in the chat to see if there are questions in the chat. No. So let's, I know Vanessa, you had your hand up. Do you have a question that you would like to ask? You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
No, it's okay. Never mind.
What? Are you sure? Did we answer everything?
Problem. And I have to leave. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you both. It was very informative. I appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye,
so much,
Vanessa.
Vanessa.
Vanessa is part of our Power Interfaith team, and she's a practicing Catholic. And so just so that you know, Isabel or Carol, do you, either one of you, have a question that you would like to ask our lovely ladies?
Oh, this is Carol here.
Hi,
Let me
Carol.
see. Start video. Thank you. I've been here and appreciated this so much. I'm not a priest or a minister, but I've loved, of course, as a woman, hearing about what you've been through. And I myself, I'm so sorry. I myself 27 years ago started my salon on a spiritually creative life after a whole lifetime of knowing since I was a little girl at 4 years old that I wanted.
Carol, you're frozen, my dear.
Sorry,
That's okay.
been
You're having a little trouble with your internet. If you write the question in the chat, we could answer it for you. And that way you can hear it, even though maybe we're not able to hear your voice.
to just
Oh,
Sometimes that happens, we know. So until she gets back, so Carol, just write it in the chat, honey. You could write it in the chat. I'm just so grateful that
write what in the chat.
yeah, did you write it in the chat?
Write what?
Your question.
I'm so sorry. I really hadn't formulated a question. I was just saying
Oh.
hello, thank you, and telling you who I was. I'm
Okay.
sure I have many questions, but I'm so sorry I let there be an interruption. I just have some people coming and it's wonderful morning. Thank you.
We're glad you were on. Thank you, Carol, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So ladies, so awesome. I'm so grateful that you were here today. So grateful.
may I give a gift?
Sure.
Lucy and Julie, you are wonderful. The last book I wrote was called Ignore the No. And it is written for people who are told, no, you can't do that. I was told I was not college material. That was in high school. And I have 3 college degrees on the ordination. And I've written 20 books. And I've taught college for 44 years. Ignore them. I'd like to send both of you a copy of the book because you have just blossomed into what that book is all about. Don't let anybody ever tell you you can't. And if whether it's a male or a female, or just know that God is behind you, giving you the sense that you need to move forward on doing something. And I am so impressed, so impressed. Thank you.
So am I. I'm just loving you ladies so much. I just am.
Steve, thank you so much for offering to send your book to me. I will cherish it and be very happy to read it. I would like to say that to sum up everybody's thoughts, including Carol King's and Jane's, that it's a long road to full inclusion in the church. However, we really haven't said what the endpoint that we are seeking is. And that is a fully inclusive church is the only church that directly represents the body of Christ. And whoever's standing at the altar must represent the people around the altar. And that includes full inclusion for LGBTQIA people as well, and for everyone who has been marginalized in the church. And that is the church that we are creating, the fully representational church. And that everything that women have gone through to get ordained has been theological groundwork that has helped women in other denominations, but it's also helped disabled people, people of color, and all other people of different classes, people around the world. We are truly, as Jesse said at the very beginning, building on the work of other people before us. And the end point is that fully representative church that then will be full of all the gifts of the people who have been kept from exercising their gifts. When there is male supremacy and other forms of white supremacy and ableism and all of these, and this, also, heterosexualism and cisgenderism, all of these shut out all the gifts that God is trying to give us. And so imagine what the church will look like when everybody's there contributing. Already, I see the Episcopal Church has flowered hugely in issues of inclusion. There is now queer theology, along with feminist theology, bringing us great insights that we did not have before. And so I feel so sorry for these churches that have squelched and excluded all of these voices because they are not having this richness. When I like to leave people with an image I got when I was out in Nebraska, that the church in these authoritarian places is like a field of Monsanto corn. That is a highly scientifically cloned kind of corn, and no biodiversity whatsoever in the field, and massive amounts of pesticides. It's for it to enable to grow, that the authoritarian church has to pour pesticides on everybody else's gifts to keep people from rising up, but that what God intends for us is that we should live in a full prairie ecosystem with a full diversity of all kinds of life, mutually supporting each other, which brings forth even more life. And then wonderful things happen when you seek out biodiversity in the church like that. And so I'm hoping that's, that everything women have gone through is just a piece of what the greater picture is that God has for all of us.
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful conclusion. I would like to just read a sentence from Jane. It was, I think, one of the thoughts we were talking about, what is your vision or a gift? And she says, my vision, and that she was able to accomplish it in her parish as a Roman Catholic priest, but she wanted the vision for the entire Catholic Church. But she said she was able to found a Roman Catholic parish for marginalized Catholics, driven away Catholics, fallen away Catholics, divorced and remarried without annulment Catholics, gay, bisexual, lesbian, transgender Catholics, and all of her friends and anybody else who wants to come and worship. So her vision and your vision, Julie and Jesse, are one and the same. And so we will hold that in prayer with you, knowing it is happening, and it's bound to, it has to, it cannot not happen. So thank you, ladies, so much. I'm going to end the recording, and I want to keep in touch with you because I think you're amazing.